time to look at some more Jurassic Park Card Game cards. My little creation here. We're going to go through the assets. Assets come in three flavors: facility, paddock upgrade, and employee. Facilities and employees are just played to the table without positional dependence. Paddock upgrades are played to the table specifically to a paddock, which they modify directly. The big difference between facilities and employees, beyond one being buildings and one being characters, is employees have a upkeep cost, they have a payroll you must pay, whereas facilities are an upfront payment. Um, so really the differences are thematic. Facilities and employees come in the form of Chaos 3 cards, and paddock upgrades are Chaos 2. So your facilities and employees take up the same slots in your deck. So you have to pick which ones you want to use out of the full pool of both. Whereas your paddock upgrades, you will have 11 of those specifically. So 11 combined facilities plus employees, 11 paddock upgrades for 22 assets per deck. So the first one we got here is Staff Center. This is a fairly basic facility where you're paying some upfront cost to permanently reduce the total payroll of all the employees in your park by 2. So this is a sort of an economic engine, but with a little bit of a stipulation on it. It takes 3 turns to be net positive, and it is entirely dependent upon you actually needing at least 2 payroll costs worth of employees for your build. So Staff Center would obviously be most optimal in a deck where you had a lot of employees and not many facilities to increase the odds that this is actually going to help you. Next, we got Maintenance Shed. Maintenance Shed is a lightning rod type effect where by building this relatively cheap building, you can protect your other facilities and upgrades from being disabled at the expense of Maintenance Shed instead being disabled. So essentially, a preventative measure to protect perhaps some sort of really core facility or upgrade for your strategy that you really don't want to get disabled. So that's the idea there. I feel like this card could probably use a slight additional effect. Perhaps, off the top of my head, literally right now, adding a chaos effect to this to restore it if it is disabled, I think would be a nice change. Like, currently in this form, you could kind of just run anything that fixes a disabled building. And with the 4.0 rule set and not having like 4.0, I've said it before, we'll say it again, moves towards a multiple action system away from a phase-based system. So in 3.0, this current iteration of the game we're showing here, you go 1 action a turn, 1 clone a turn, you build something, 1 thing every turn, you hire some people. That's the system. So Maintenance Shed is more interesting in that system because it is a building that protects from your other buildings being disabled, whereas a unit action would take up your action for the turn to fix the disable. This takes up your build slot, your build action for the turn. That's kind of the idea, right? And then in the reboot game, you would probably prefer to just have the retroactive action to fix the disable effect rather than have this preemptive Maintenance Shed. So in the 4.0 game, this needs a little bit extra juice to be worth the effort. Le Gigante. This is the restaurant from the original Jurassic Park. This is a fairly simple revenue generator, the most simple revenue generator in the sense that it just straight up generates revenue. So you pay 1, and then you make 1 every turn after that. So net positive in 2 turns and just free money. But it is a very small trickle. So Hall Escape, the distinctive piece of marketing here from Jurassic World, present in the Innovation Center, now a facility in your park. It acts as conditional card draw specific to species. So you get to peek at a card every turn, and then if it is a species card, it goes into your hand. Another fairly simple effect. Another effect, like the Le Gigante, that's kind of, basic. However, if this was just straight up drawing a card, it would be too good, so this needs some sort of stipulation, because a card is worth a lot more than $1. A fairly early design in the card game as well. This has existed in a lot of forms through many iterations of the game. We have a hatchery. Hatchery originally had a different effect that is still in the game, but has been moved to a different card. And Hatchery has had this effect added. So what Hatchery does, well, first off, Hatchery, this effect, not going to work in 4.0. This needs to be totally redone. But in 3.0, this effect, pretty powerful, which is why it's a 4 expense cost facility. Normally, you get one clone action a turn, so you can choose to clone a new species card from your hand, or you can choose to clone additional population for a species already in your park. Hatchery lets you do both. You can't double up on one or the other, but if you clone an additional population, you can also clone the species. This effectively is saying that you can just do both every turn. Because cloning a species and then being able to clone additional population is pretty much functionally the same. Like maybe there's a corner case where the ordering does matter, but largely just a way to say you get to do 2 clone actions a turn, but it has to be this specific clone actions, right? There were no alternate clone options in 3.0 in alpha here. So these are the only 2 things you can ever do in the clone phase. Um, and yeah, this would just become a default action cloning in 4.0. So this would just not really do anything in 4.0. It would actually kind of be core rules almost in a sense. Geothermal power plant. Card art here is from Fallen Kingdom concept art of the building they escaped from the baryonyx in. It's just a very nice shot of what that building looks like, which is why I went with the concept art. Um, the power plant serves to reduce the expense cost of facilities and paddock upgrades by 1. And then you can discard this from play as an action to repair a disabled card. So kind of a different counterpoint to the maintenance shed. This is, maintenance shed is proactive. This is reactive, but the maintenance shed can be restored, and this cannot be. Once you've used this to fix a disabled card, it's just gone. But it's got this additional cost reducer here. Very good if you want to build a lot of facilities and paddock upgrades. Kind of analogous to Staff Center, but in the opposite direction, right? Field Lab. Field Lab is part of a trio of asset cards that target the different obstacle types, kind of counterparts to those actions we saw in the previous preview video that specifically just cleared them. These ones are not as flat of a cycle. Like the actions, they were literally the same card, they just targeted different things. These are very, very different. So the Field Lab targets behavioral obstacles. And it's a little bit of another riff on Maintenance Shed where it's like a preemptive card. It's cheap, you throw it out, and it's just going to cancel straight up the first behavior obstacle thrown at you, and then be removed from play. So basically, this is going to be on the table. Everybody's going to see it on the table, and so somebody kind of has to take the initiative of throwing a behavior obstacle at you if they want to clear the way for subsequent behavioral obstacles. Otherwise, this would have the effect of kind of just protecting you forever. Another part of the cycle is the emergency bunker. This is the one that interacts with accidents. So you can pay 4 revenue when this is in play to trash an accident in your park at any time. So this is not an action. This is like an instant speed freebie thing that you can just do. But that's part of why it is this fairly steep cost of 4 revenue. I feel like this could probably do with a rework. Definitely one of the things going into 4.0 from 3.0 was it felt like obstacles were too soft. It felt like the push of the game in alpha was just on how well you would set up your economy engine, and the disruptions the opponent would throw at you would be kind of secondary. And I wanted those to be a little more balanced in 4.0. I wanted dinosaur escapes to be more threatening, and I think part of that would require taking a hard look at the outs, the things that cancel out obstacles, like emergency bunker. I think Field Lab is good because this only just targets one ever and then is gone. But this is just like, if you have a bunch of money, you will just never have a problem with an accident ever again. And I think that's too strong. Um, Embryonics Administration. This is a newer facility based around the genetic modifications that were being added to the game in between the original previews and now. It serves to give you a rebate whenever you play a genetic modification and gives you the capability to pull genetic modifications out of your discard pile. Not typically going to have your genetic modifications end up in your discard pile. It's only really going to happen if your species like leaves play, or if you happen to get like a mill effect that discards cards from your deck. Definitely the rebate is the bigger part of the Embryonics Administration building. But it's not an irrelevant secondary effect. Also, of course, you could use this against something like Dilophosaurus, where the opponent clones a Dilophosaurus, you have to discard. You knowingly discard a gene mod because you have a way to get it back, kind of indirectly negating the Dilophosaur poison. DNA sequencing supercomputers is the original text for hatchery. I wanted to reference specifically the supercomputers from the original Jurassic Park. These Cray supercomputer towers you can see in the background here. It's very cool and distinctive part of the original park's design. And they specifically say DNA sequencing supercomputers in the film, and it's kind of a sing-songy nice phrase, so it felt like a thing that would be good to make into a card. This gives you a nice effect of giving you this very minor reduction in the cost of a new species and a card to replace it whenever you clone it. Typically throughout the a game, you're going to clone like 4 to 5 new species if you're going to win the game. So this ends up being 4 to 5 card draw and like net $2 to $3. So it's a nice effect, but it's not it's not as crazy as it might seem, right? Cloning a species is specifically playing the species card, not cloning additional population. So this does not trigger that often. Control room. This is the Jurassic World control room, of course, as you can tell. This removes the hand size limit, allowing you to control or to stock up on more cards, keep more options available to you, and immediately gives you a card to replace it to keep that large hand size flowing. In practice, control room was pretty hard to capitalize on. It often ended up being fairly inconsequential. But part of that is in playtesting. I was playtesting with my physical cards I had printed from an online printer, and so I only had one set of each card to be played with, and I was playing with the set of decks I had that were balanced with each other to try and be fair. Control room starts to look much better when you move away from that kind of balance thing and start to stack a lot more card draw effects together. And this is kind of like almost in some sense a second phase of playtesting that needed to happen, of like, okay, the game plays well with these like generic decks. What about when you push things in different directions? If we push all the card draw together into one deck, does that get broken? And like that was never fully playtested. That was an angle that we still had to investigate, and playtesting really has ceased at this point. So yeah, we'll leave that to anybody who plays the game to figure out if card draw is overpowered in conjunction with more card draw. It probably is, maybe, but I mean, you are limiting your other options if you're just running straight card draw things, and with limited actions, there is a diminishing return on drawing too many cards. So, embryo cold storage, another very expensive facility. Expensive up front, expensive in general with this action, but it functions as an alternate win condition card by giving you a source of additional fame outside of your animals, completely disconnected from your animals. This was the only way to gain fame completely independent of other animals. There's fame modifiers to animals, but this one is just its own thing. In practice, hard to utilize. At the point where you're making enough money to capitalize on cold storage, you're kind of probably already on your way to winning the game anyway through fame, because you need dinosaurs to make money, um, or winning through the alternate victory condition of generating enough money to win flat out, irrespective of your animals. The niche this falls into is smoothing out your fame score. Um, it's not so much that the original intended design of like, oh, we can just make money and like build into this cold storage to win that way. That doesn't really pan out, but getting to like 13 fame from animals and then dropping a cold storage, getting a couple counters on it to win, uh, and doing that through your build action and your actions in the turn, your regular action, um, that was like the big niche this card had. It was like, it was not, it ended up not being a win condition in itself. It ended up being a way to smooth out access to winning normally by fame. So a functional card, um, even though it didn't really turn out to function in the way it was originally intended to, as this like alternate win condition. Advanced incubators. This is our last facility here. This is another later stage design. You're paying 3 expense up front and your build action to put this into play with heat tokens on it. And then when you're cloning additional population, you get these progressively smaller and smaller discounts. Eventually netting a fairly substantial amount of money saved on breeding additional population. But of course, the downside being, if you don't get all those additional population counters out, it doesn't matter. And you probably, depending on your strategy, you may not want necessarily to breed that much additional population. Additional population protects your dinosaurs from being removed from play and provides additional income, but it does not help you win the game typically. There's definitely builds that this is very powerful in, like a Gallimimus breeding centric build, for instance, could get some value from this. Maybe not on Gallimimus necessarily, because the Gallimimus already has a cost reduction, but something centered around that. Also, just like any deck could make advantage of this if it drew it early enough, because typically the way a game goes is you clone 4 or whatever additional species, and put some population on them to protect them before you win, right? So in a typical game, if you had this at the start of the game, you would get full value from it. So it is perfectly playable in any build, but is optimal in a build that is going to want to really capitalize on additional population. The other thing is additional population is the smoothing mechanic, right? So you get this one cloning action a turn to apply to your park in some way. Ideally, you clone a new species because that puts you closer to victory. And if you can't, then you can clone additional population to at least improve your economy, right? So when I say you play 4 species and like clone 4 additional population optimally, that typically doesn't happen. Typically, you're going to clone 2 or 3 times as much population as you do new species. So another angle that like improves the economy of advanced incubators. It is better than better than you might think at first glance. All right, so that's the end of the facility cards. That was, I believe, 14 facilities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. No, 12, 13. Yeah, because we have the headliners. We're going to look at the headliner facilities and employees at the end. 15 facilities, 15 employees. I think. Let me double check this. I have the numbers. Yeah, 15 employees, 15 facilities, counting the headliners for both. 29 upgrades instead of 30 was what we ended with, but there is a special upgrade that we'll get to. So onto the employees. So employees are also Chaos 3, as I mentioned. Instead of an expense cost, they have payroll. Payroll is paid every turn, whereas expense is paid once. So if you want to keep the person in your park active, you have to pay this every turn. If you can't pay it, they get fired. You can also choose not to pay it and fire the employee. So Alan Grant here was one of the very earliest employees designed. So he gives you this discount to all new species you clone. for -3 each at the cost of 1 payroll. So Alan Grant can be used in a few different ways. You could hold them into your hand until you've got a couple of new species to clone. You could throw Alan Grant into the park. You could then clone some new species while you pay his payroll for a few turns and then let him go. He's kind of functioning as a temporary advisor in a sense. The other option you could do with Alan Grant is do that, but with like one animal. And that what you can do with any employee is you can play them. Hiring is a free, essentially a free action. So you hire Alan Grant, you clone a new species, and next turn when it comes time to pay him, you just fire him. You're just like, sorry, Grant, bye. And this does net you, $3 essentially, 3 revenue by reducing the cost of that species by 3. So a fairly effective discount, even if you just use it once. And then you can combine this with career fair, the action we saw last video, to just bring Grant back specifically when you have a new animal to clone to double dip on that discount without having to pay him. All employees have a role. Grant being a paleontologist, every role is limited to only having one character in the park with that role at a time. So if you have a paleontologist and you hire a new paleontologist, you got to let your old one go. You can't have 2 typically. Claire, during role operations, she functions as kind of a manager type character. So she causes your other employees to have reduced payroll cost, potentially to 0. So Claire is pretty important if you want a build that has a lot of employees in it, because she can, especially if they're like cheap employees like Grant with payroll 1, she can single-handedly cover all of that payroll, which is a pretty substantial benefit. She also has this additional effect here of allowing you to take a second action during your action phase. Also pretty good. Honestly, looking at this card again now, she could probably be increased to payroll 2. This is a pretty effective card effect. Although, again, in beta, when we're moving to this different action system, this doesn't really function. So she would need a little bit of a rework. I think the cost reduction effect is very good, but it is, you need 2 employees minimum to make this work. So I do think she needs a little bit more beyond just the cost reduction effect. So she's something that would need to be reevaluated. Dennis Nedry, a payroll 2 employee. He likes his money. He is another operations character, so mutually exclusive with Claire. You can't have both of these in your control room. Nedry has the effect of allowing you to play a second obstacle during your obstacle phase. Now, there was some discussion from some people on the nature of Nedry as this employee. The concept was essentially that it's analogous to you being the person financially backing Nedry's sabotage, with this capability to play a second obstacle each turn. Ultimately, this effect of this employee that lets you play a second obstacle is something I want in the game, and it fits Nedry pretty well, I think. So yeah, this is the concept of a Nedry that is still a saboteur, but is loyal to you, the person running the park. So you are Dodgson in this scenario, I guess. Ellie Sattler, role consultant. I kept Alan Grant as a paleontologist and not a consultant because a paleontologist as a role in a Jurassic Park card game felt too perfect. So I wanted to keep that as a thing. Whereas most of the other outside characters that were brought in, like Ellie and Ian, are specifically consultants, i.e. an outside person that is not actively employed directly by the park. Ellie here, as a paleobotanist, protects animals in your park from West Indian lilac, a very, very direct and narrow reference to the film, stopping a particular singular card. West Indian lilac is a pretty good card. We'll see it in the obstacles eventually. So it's a fairly like ubiquitous card, but it is of course a very narrow effect, which is why she has the secondary effect here, giving you a chance to essentially treat diseases in your park by taking this action that she has as your action for the turn. Of course, again, all of this referencing her role in the Six Triceratops scene. Franklin Webb, another operations role character. Um, he's got this little text here representing, how he interacts closely with Zia Rodriguez, and they're kind of related characters in a sense. They form a iconic duo in as much as anything in Fallen Kingdom is iconic, I guess. He specifically acts as a protection effect for your facilities and paddock upgrades, preventing them from being specifically disabled. They can still be removed from play, they just can't be temporarily shut down. Kind of referencing him being, part of the crew that was bringing facilities back up online in Fallen Kingdom. Vic Hoskins, this is the third piece of the trio I was talking about in the facilities that interacts with specific obstacle types. We saw behavior and accident interactions from the facilities. Hoskins stops sabotages. So you keep this guy on your payroll. If you are targeted by a sabotage and you flip a 1 or a 3 on your chaos effect for the turn, you can stop that sabotage. So it is a big commitment to keep this guy on staff, but it's going to act as a deterrent to being sabotaged, right? Especially in multiplayer. Is anybody going to want to sabotage you when there is a 33% chance that sabotage is just straight up canceled? So kind of a fun card. I like the fact that like it acts more as a deterrent than as an answer, right? I think that's fun, particularly in multiplayer. And I do think multiplayer is where this game shines the most. The end games in multiplayer are pretty interesting when you have one player who's visually or quite visibly getting close to winning, and then you end up with everybody else kind of targeting against them. And you get a lot of come from behind victories of people who manage to sneak through while everybody's busy dealing with the main guy that's about to win. There's some interesting gameplay that comes from that. Yeah, I mentioned before, Ian's another consultant. Ian is a card that designed himself, of course. We got the chaos and chaos effect mechanics. And having Ian interact with the chaos is just obviously what he would do as a card. So Ian provides this capability that during any chaos pull on your turn, be it a chaos effect or a regular chaos pull for a card effect, you can modify that number by adding 1 to it, giving you some control over the result. Again, somewhat ironically, actually acting against the mathematical concept of chaos by making the result more predictable. But I find the irony amusing. We'll throw this in there. This is not an official card. Lowry Crothers was at one point designed for the game, but this effect just became Franklin Webb's effect. So this is non-canon, not actually in the set. Owen Grady. Owen Grady, of course, had to be in the game. He's the main character of the second trilogy, as much as I dislike him. He is a 2-payroll animal handler. He's been redesigned a few times. I believe I don't remember if this is the effect I previewed on him earlier, if I did preview him earlier. But at one point, the Robert Muldoon effect was attached to Owen Grady, which was an effect to reduce the danger of your carnivores in your park. Now Owen Grady specifically interacts with velociraptors and other raptors, providing a modifier to those. So he has this Chaos Effect X, which means, whatever number you flip each turn for Chaos Effect has this effect, keeping your raptors more secure by some variable number. And then he buffs the fame by 1 point specifically on velociraptors. So raptors includes Atrociraptors, Pyroraptors, and Velociraptors, and Indoraptor. While, obviously Velociraptor is just Velociraptor. So kind of allowing you to build a raptor-centric build, or maybe even just a deck that has Velociraptor in it. Although I would say this fame, the secondary fame bonus, is definitely secondary. The chaos effect part, keeping raptors secure, is much more powerful because raptors do have high security ratings, kind of universally. So this is pretty powerful actually, if inconsistent. I mentioned Muldoon. Muldoon is also an animal handler, so exclusive with Owen Grady. He's got a more generic effect here, reducing the security rating of all carnivores by a flat 1 to a minimum of 1, and reducing their ferocity during escapes by 1 as well, which is something Owen Grady doesn't do. You know, he reduces the security rating of your raptors, keeping them more contained, but he does not mitigate the damage they cause if they do escape the way Muldoon does. Definitely a more generic effect, kind of a generic version of Owen Grady, but that's because this was the original, like, you know, carnivore animal handler effect. So that's why that's like that. Sarah Harding, she was added because I wanted more representation for Lost World. She is another animal handler role. She could have been, I don't remember. In Lost World, is she explicitly a paleontologist? I don't, because she is in the novel, right? I don't remember. But anyway, the effect here is very much in line with the animal handler role, being the herbivore version of the carnivore effect on Muldoon here, which is much more in line with her presentation in the film. You know, her acting as this photographer investigating the island, interacting with the stegosaurs. That's, you know, I'm more concerned specifically with that. If we made her like a paleontologist, I don't know what she would do. Let me look that up. This is one of those little things of like, wait, what? Okay, yeah, I think I'm just crossing wires. She's an animal behaviorist both in the film and the novel. So great. She should be an animal handler. So I was correct. Okay, in my original like choice of role here. Yeah, I don't know why I was thinking she was a paleontologist in the novel for some reason. Because obviously we got Levine in the novel as a paleontologist. That's just a weird one of those weird little. You know, I'm getting old. It's a little bit of dementia coming in there. Yeah. So she reduces herbivore security by 1 in the same way Muldoon reduces carnivores, but does not reduce the ferocity. But she does have this additional little effect here of paying for Ian Malcolm's payroll. You know, if you have Sarah Harding on staff, Malcolm will show up for free. Very much a reference to the Lost World, where, you know, the only reason Hammond got Malcolm to the island was because Sarah Harding was there. So we catch that effect specifically with Sarah Harding. We have Henry Wu, the man himself. He is our geneticist character. And, you know, going with the chaotic nature of the character, he has a chaos effect here, a 0, 2, or 4 chance, 0, 2, or 4 to draw a card, a 50% chance essentially per turn to draw a card. Improved substantially with manipulation. Like, you can make this essentially guaranteed. Card draw was kind of thematically representing like research in the game design. That's why you remember when we did actions, we had breakthrough as like the generic card draw thing. Well, that's a research breakthrough. It gives you more cards, more options in your hand that you can do. So that's why Woo is a card draw effect. It kind of represents this thematic theme that it represents this idea of card drawing representing the research. And finally, of course, we need Zia, since she was mentioned on Franklin's card. She is an animal handler because she is a paleo veterinarian. Different role than Franklin, allows them to be played together. So she draws a card when you play Franklin. And if we remember Franklin's effect, Franklin draws a card when you play Zia. So these are mutually exclusive, technically. The point being that whenever you play the second one of the pair, you get a free card draw, right? It doesn't matter which one's played first because they both have the same effect for the other one. And then she can heal a dinosaur in your park, kind of as a counterpoint. As an animal handler, she's a counterpoint to Ellie a little bit. Different role, of course, in that she has this action that interacts with negative effects on your animals. Specifically, Ellie cures disease. She heals a dinosaur. This is a much less, typically less useful effect. Especially like healing is going to be more relevant if the opponent is playing a direct damage effect deck. Um, but you also have a lot of tools to play around, even having to heal your dinosaurs. So she needed a little bit of extra effect here to make up for that. So she also has this secondary effect where you can choose to instead draw a card and then discard a card. Straight up drawing a card probably would be a little too powerful, so that's why you have to discard afterwards. So it's card filtering, not actually card advantage. Um, and we do have more employees. We'll get to them in a second because we're going to go through our headliners for the 3 Chaos assets. We have 2 facilities. The first one is the Innovation Center, obviously the most iconic building out of Jurassic World era. And this is a 3 expense building. You're going to plop down, and it's going to give you this default action you can take every turn in place of a different action to. I had to mute a sneeze. It's going to give you this default action to gain 3 revenue or draw a card. Typically, in the alpha version, the 3.0 version, you don't have any default actions, right? So the only way you take an action is if you specifically have one in play, or you have a blue action card you can play from your hand. Innovation Center then is pretty powerful in that it gives you something to do every turn, always, no matter what. The downside is if you do have an action to play from a hand, or another action on a card in play, then you can't use Innovation Center. It's a little underwhelming in that regard. Innovation Center, though, deliberately combos, very powerful, of course, with Claire. Giving you the second action during your action phase almost always allows you to essentially always do Innovation Center every turn, which is pretty good and strong. It's very deliberate that it's Claire that empowers the Innovation Center, since they're both World Era. We also have, as a counterpoint to the Innovation Center, the Visitor Center. I should mention the headliners, 1 per deck, per number. So you get 1 Chaos 3 headliner, and that's why the title is in gold. That signifies that it is a headliner. So the Visitor Center and Innovation Center are mutually exclusive, as they ought to be, right? They're kind of the same building, but the Park Era version and the World Era version, they're not literally the same building because the Visitor Center exists in Jurassic World as well, but they fill the same role. Visitor Center is a very powerful draw engine. It's just at the start of the turn, you get to draw an extra card. Flat. Not much to say about it. This is one of the early headliner designs. Visitor Center, Innovation Center kind of designed themselves. Originally, this was always what Visitor Center was. Originally, Innovation Center just was action gain 3 revenue. But over time, I came to see that this wasn't really good enough for a headliner, which is why we added the or draw card to give you a little more choice to it. It does make Innovation Center and Visitor Center a little less of a counterpart with each other, because when this drew a card and this gained revenue, they were obviously paired but opposite, and now Innovation Center can draw the card just in a different way, which damages that feeling a little bit, but it was needed to make Innovation Center work, really. The other 3 headliners we have are your employees. So 3 headliner employees, 2 facilities. They are all CEOs. Specifically, the CEO was always a headliner by design. So the first one we have is John Hammond, payroll 1, and then he gives all your species in the same park +1 income, which means as long as you have 2 species at least in the park, this is a straight positive on income levels. Another very early design that basically just survived unchanged. It's a good economic engine, nice, simple, to the point. The last CEO design was Peter Ludlow. When I moved some deck design stuff around, changed the chaos numbers, for balancing reasons, I needed like a 5th facility / CEO headliner, and Peter Ludlow made a lot of sense as the InGen CEO in the Lost World. Following off of him being antagonist CEO, he has this chaos effect, which gets obstacles back from your trash, potentially, but also as a CEO trying to do his own thing with a park, this chaos effect also serves as a way to get actions back. And actions just kind of thematically feel like a counterpart to obstacles a little bit. So it just feels thematically appropriate to have both effects on the same card as kind of counterparts of each other. He also serves to fill the niche in terms of deck building for a chaos effect headliner in this slot. Since none of these had chaos effects, it made a lot of sense to put a chaos effect on the last one. And finally, our last CO is, of course, Simon Masrani. To represent him being responsible for building Jurassic World, he gives you this free card draw whenever you put down a facility or an employee in your park. And allows you to specifically play a second facility or paddock upgrade during your construction phase, reducing the cost of the second one by 1. Kind of adding a little bit of decision making to the game on if you specifically always play your facilities and paddock upgrades in pairs for that discount, or if it's too much of a situational loss to wait a turn to play a facility or paddock upgrade. Yeah, so kind of I like specifically with the CEOs that we kind of have 3 different angles of the game. We have something that affects species, we have something that affects assets and obstacles, and we have something that affects assets or actions and obstacles, sorry, and something that affects assets. So between the 3 different CEOs, they all interact with different strategies and different card types, covering kind of the whole spread. And I think the effects are pretty on brand for the different characters. So very happy with those. So that is all the Chaos 3 cards. Now we have the Chaos 2s, which are all the paddock upgrades. So we'll start with Viewing Vent. So the paddock upgrades are played as your construction action. A construction action is either a facility or a paddock upgrade specifically. The difference between facilities and paddock upgrades is paddock upgrades go in a paddock. So these are positional dependent cards in your park. Essentially, the park is a row of paddocks stretching to the left and to the right, which can have a species card in them and a facility or a paddock upgrade card in them. The paddock is the combination of the two, irrespective of whether either of the cards is in the paddock. You generate blank paddocks to the side of wherever you have paddocks that are occupied, and the spacing remains. So if I have 3 paddocks and I destroy the vent in the middle paddock and there's nothing left in that paddock, that gap remains and you can fill it back in later. You can play a paddock upgrade before playing a species card. You don't have to play it afterwards. I think technically the paddocks don't exist when there's no cards in them. It's the placement. Sorry. Yeah. You can use a paddock upgrade or a species to generate the new paddock to the left or the right of existing paddocks. That's how that works. I don't remember. I'm not going to lie. I don't remember if there was a specific card interaction that motivated that specifically being the rules. But yeah. Not massively important, that distinction. So yeah, Viewing Vent is a fairly basic paddock upgrade. It's providing an income modifier to the species in the paddock. This is pretty typical of like attraction style paddock upgrades, things that the visitors would use to like observe the dinosaurs, right? Those typically provide modifiers to income. And then this one provides additional income as long as there are no escape attempts in your park, kind of representing, the fact that the Viewing Vet is more popular when the park is stable. And when some sort of disaster strikes the park, people don't attend this as much, and you don't make as much. Veterinary Field Station is kind of a different style of paddock upgrade. They don't all represent attractions. There are security upgrades or other support upgrades you can kind of put in a paddock instead of something that, represents a feature of the park, an attraction of the park that provides like income. So this acts as a way to protect your species instead, blocking them from becoming diseased and then giving you a way to heal it in a pinch. Definitely the big effect here is blocking disease from targeting the paddock. The secondary effect to trash this and heal is like very much a desperation play, but still a nice effect to just have on tap. Treetop Gazer. This is a very, very basic paddock upgrade that has had been in the game for a very long time. One of the original cards designed again. Maybe too basic, but there personally I have some like feelings towards this card. Like the basicness of it and the restrictiveness of it being specific to sauropods is a fairly unique design in that sense amongst the attractions in the game. And it just kind of feels like part of the game at this point, you know? Making this broader and more generic doesn't really feel like it needs to be done because personally like the history I feel with this card, right? If that makes sense. I also think thematically it makes a little bit of sense to have this sauropod centric paddock upgrade only work for sauropods because you're up here in the tree line looking at them at eye level. That wouldn't really be a attraction that would work well with like a ceratopsian, for example. So it kind of makes sense that this interacts would not interact at all with like anything but a sauropod. This is from Jurassic World concept art. The idea of this, I don't know if this is canon. I don't remember if I don't think Treetop Gazers is canon to Jurassic World. I think it was kind of replaced or just left out, but it was in the design concepts for Jurassic World. This sauropod exhibit where you would walk at like eye level. I definitely just like the concept of it too, which is why it made it into the game. Um, yeah, Serena Veriformans. This is funny enough. This is one of the few deleted scenes from Jurassic Park we have footage of because it's from one of the trailers. This is when Ellie actually picks up the leaf that she has during the Brachiosaur scene. You see her talk about the Serena Veriformans, but you don't see her pick up the leaf. So I found it amusing to put that deleted scene on a card specifically. Serena Veriformans is a fabrication of the Jurassic universe, so I also wanted a card to represent it for that reason. This could have been I think this is in the novel, right? And it's mentioned to be poisonous. This could have been kind of a counterpart for West Indian lilac, which is an obstacle that damages herbivores. But I kind of liked the idea of this double-edged sword where you would have, you would plant this in one of your herbivore exhibits as just a nice, a nice little environmental thing to make the paddock look better. But it would have this risk of if your herbivores happen to eat it, they would get sick, right? I if I remember correctly, like the poisonous thing I think might come from the novel for Serena Veriformans. And there's mentions the effect here is kind of riffing on the whole, the dinosaurs don't eat the West Indian lilac, but they get sick anyway type thing, right? Serena Veriformans as a plant cannot be disabled. Like you can't really, sabotage a plant. I mean, you can, but like pesticide, but conceptually, that's the idea there. But then, yeah, it makes the paddock more profitable by making it more attractive looking, but has a 1 in 6 chance essentially to cause an injury to your herbivore in the paddock. An interesting effect in my mind. A later stage addition too, when I was expanding the paddock upgrades out. So it goes with Scenic Lagoon as well, referencing specifically the Brachiosaur scene, obviously. Rather than this interacting with sauropods, I made this interact with hadrosaurs. This is also a card that was added in a time when I wanted to make the clades more impactful. Like we always had treetop gazers since the very start of the game, but there were not a lot of other cards that interacted directly with subtypes of animals. So the Lagoon functioned as another card to do that. So this serves to make your herbivores more peaceful while providing more income. Again, like a lot of attractions type paddock upgrades tended to do. And then it had just a double effect for hadrosaurs. So extra effective there. River Adventure. This is the real life Jurassic Park attraction from back in the 90s at Universal Studios. We made it an attraction in the card game because why not? So yeah, this is another card that was added to make more interactions with the clade subtypes. So specifically, this is going to be a paddock that's going to look at adjacent paddocks, see if there are species with different clades in those paddocks, and then this draws your card, encouraging a diversity of types of animals in your park and acting as a conditional draw engine. This is a good example of how the placement of your paddocks matters in terms of the upgrades and the species present. There's a lot of adjacency effects, especially on the paddock upgrades. But we did see some on the dinosaurs too, like Herrerasaurus and Kylosaurus. We got the motion sensor tracking system. This is another thing coming directly from the movie. The motion sensor tracking system is mentioned during the Jeeps at the beginning of the movie, right before they see the Brachiosaurus. Hammond is telling Gennaro about all the security systems that are in place. These are barely glimpsed in the film. I think specifically in the actual like production version of the film, like the film as you can see it on home video or like in the theater, you only see this as like a reflection in the car window, I think at some point when they're on the tour. This, I believe, comes from the open mat, which is a wider screen version of Jurassic Park, where the edge of the frame in this particular shot, I think this is the T-Rex tunnel here, actually catches the motion sensor in view. Now, we know this is the motion sensor because there is concept art specifically labeled that it's the motion sensor tracking system. So, these are much more impactful in the novel. The motion sensor tracking system is a big part of the novel. It is specifically what they are investigating when they find out the dinosaurs are breeding. Grant and the kids try to use these to let the people in the control room know that they're in the park, which is probably why they designed these for the movie, even though they ended up not actually being even effectively being even included in the movie. It's kind of crazy that these were like on set and they just did not film them. Motion sensor tracking system is interesting in that it's a free, zero expense paddock upgrade you can put out. It is another system to improve the security of your paddocks, but it is conditional upon the animal breaking out. So every time it breaks out, you get a counter. The counter then makes it harder for it to break out in the future, i.e. you're tracking counters the motion, the animal escaping. Pretty happy with the effect. Thematically, maybe could be improved in some way, but it's hard to think about a good way to do that without it immediately replacing kind of some of the other security reducing upgrades. So probably stays as it is. Fun concept, even if it's not the most powerful card. Monorail is the 29th and 30th paddock upgrade in that it is providing income for every monorail in your park. So the more monorails you have, the more money your monorails make, and you're allowed to run extra copies of monorail in your deck. The alpha balancing for the deck, the final alpha version at least, is 66 card decks with 11 cards per chaos number and 2 copies of each card, except for the headliners, which are 1 copy. Monorail being the exception in that you can have 4. I flirted with having 3, and a part of me is always considering going back to 3 copies of each card in a deck maximum, because 2 is very low for a trading card game. But since alpha development is done, alpha ends in a state where cards are limited to 2 copies per deck. And that's just gonna stay. Monorail, I think, is a fun card. The first monorail you play provides no value. You need an additional monorail station, thematically, for it to matter. Then the more stations on your monorail, essentially, the more money your monorail makes for you. I really like this concept. Mobile Lab, the labs from The Lost World. This was another late stage addition when I was trying to add more paddock attractions and get more things from some of the sequel films in, specifically things from Lost World and Shapey 3, which were otherwise very hard to fit into a park builder game. The mobile lab is actually based on the gyrosphere. The original concept for the gyrosphere, as we'll see later, was a paddock upgrade that could move, and that makes sense that the mobile lab would do the same. Unlike the gyrosphere, which is an attraction, this is not an attraction in the conventional sense. Instead, it allows you to reduce the ferocity of your nearby animals as kind of like a science station type thing, reducing the damage they could cause around the park. And since it's mobile, you know, you can play this at any stage of the game, get it out there, and then as you get more dangerous animals in the park, you move the mobile lab over to them to keep their ferocity low. Not the most impactful or powerful card, but there is definitely a strength to being able to move freely your paddock upgrades. Jurassic Tour, which is the truck from Jurassic World, taking the name from Jurassic World Evolution, of course. This acts as a paddock upgrade that supports a additional population breeding theme in the park. Of course, it works very well with Gallimimus as a deliberate design choice. This turns your animal into a draw engine in addition to an economic engine. If I have an animal with 4 additional population counters, that makes an additional 4 revenue every turn, and then, you know, gives you this card draw. And there's no limit to this. You can technically massively overinvest into a single species to turn it into a massive draw engine. But in a practical sense, this is never going to go above like draw 2 cards in a typical game. But it is definitely something you can build around. High Hide from The Lost World as well. This gives the species in the paddock adjacent income for every species in an adjacent paddock. The idea being the high hide is being raised up into a tree, and you can see not just the paddock the high hide is associated with, but the paddocks next to it, giving you this bird's eye view of multiple animals. So the high hide is only as attractive to visitors as the amount of animals nearby is, so it scales with adjacencies. Fairly simple design, thematic. Very happy with this. The herbivore feeder from Jurassic World Evolution 1. We have a carnivore feeder. Let's find that real quick, just as a show there. The carnivore feeder, of course, being actually from the movie. They're designed as counterparts of each other. These are legacy designs coming from very early stages of the game that have survived all the way through. They interact specifically with herbivores and carnivores separately, giving you a flat reduction to ferocity for the animal in the paddock during escape attempts, meaning it causes less revenue lost if it does escape. And then I think at one point these were like -1 security, -1 ferocity, and then they were changed because that was too simple, too like restrictive on subsequent card designs. The effects were split up to make more different effects. And this eventually became a chaos effect trigger for additional income. The idea being like the feeder in the game and the carnivore feeder in the movie don't always have something on them, right? The feeder has to be triggered to bring up the plants or the goat, and then the animal can interact with it. That's why it's a chaos effect. Sometimes there's plants, sometimes there's a goat, sometimes there isn't. You know what? Let's do the carnivore feeder right now. These are in reverse alphabetical order because that's just the order they loaded into the image editor. But we'll do this out of order. So yeah, this is just the alternate effect, the mirrored, not mirrored, but the counterpart. Affects carnivores, has a different chaos effect number, same effect, right? So chaos effect 1, chaos effect 2. Heavy fence. You know what? This is another one we should talk about with its other component. So here, electric fence. This is one of the this is the prototypical basic security upgrade. 0 expense, -1 security. Boom, done. Put an electric fence up, the animal's less likely to escape. Simple. You can do a heavy security fence, giving you more of an upfront cost for a -2 security instead of -1. Downside, though, as we saw in Jurassic Park 3, if an animal escapes from this fence, it gets destroyed. The Spino broke through the heavy fence and just, you know, obliterated it, right? So we wanted to capture that in the card game. So there it is. Hammond Creation Lab. So the Hammond Creation Lab was a facility in Jurassic World in the Innovation Center, but it is also the building you attach to an enclosure in Jurassic World Evolution. So I split the difference. We made it a paddock upgrade to reference Jurassic World Evolution, but we use the image of the lab from the movie because that is the canonical version of it. And specifically, the reason we do it this way is the effect is very much based on the use of the Hammond Creation Lab in the Jurassic World Evolution games as where your dinosaurs come from. So it acts as a way to add a additional population discount to the paddock, making that animal easier to clone. It works with Gallimimus, making it only 1 revenue to clone a new population. Definitely the case of like, I wanted this effect in the game. I wanted this effect in the game. It had to be a paddock upgrade. What could it be, right? And so the Creation Lab for the GW reference made a lot of sense. We mentioned before the gyrosphere as something that can move around the park, and that's what it is. It is a very basic attraction that just provides +1 income to any paddock, no matter what, at the cost of 2 expense. It then just has this additional effect in that it can roll into a different paddock. Very simple, basic kind of an attraction, a paddock upgrade that just kind of sets the balancing of the game. And yeah, one that's been around for a long time. We got the gondola ride from Jurassic World. This is canon, but has never been seen in the movie or Camp Cretaceous, I don't think either, if I'm not mistaken. We have the concept art from Jurassic World for the ride here. This is another nice, cheap paddock upgrade you can put in, but is dependent on adjacencies, providing a income bonus to the species in this paddock, specifically if you have paddock upgrades in the other adjacent paddocks. The idea being that the gondola ride kind of functions as a transit from point A to point B, where point A and point B on are opposite sides, right? So the gondola ride is most effective if the visitors are going from somewhere, taking the gondola ride, seeing a dinosaur, and going to somewhere else, right? If you have a gondola ride in the middle of nowhere that goes nowhere, it's not going to be as appealing. Of course, we had to have the petting zoo, obviously. So the petting zoo is kind of somewhat of a counterpoint to the Hammond Creation Lab in that it's functioning with breeding additional population, but in this case specifically, it's providing income for additional population tokens, bonus income. So essentially making every additional population counter worth 2 income instead of 1. And the idea being that these are the baby dinosaurs that you're using in the petting zoo attraction. Another Lost World card, we have the Game Trail, referencing, of course, the Game Trail scene. Now, the Game Trail is where the carnivores go to hunt. So the idea with this would be that it gave you a way to let your carnivores hunt your herbivores. So by doing a live feeding of a dinosaur to another dinosaur, specifically an adjacent herbivore to a carnivore in this paddock, you would get a substantial income bonus and a temporary fame bonus for that turn. It's optional, so you're not forced to do it. Of course, it's not like a direct one-to-one with the Game Trail as it appears in the movie, just playing on the concept of the Game Trail and putting it into the game in a way that it works. Dueling Arena. This is the Pachycephalosaurus Arena. I wanted to make it not specifically the Pachycephalosaurus Arena because that is a little too specific. Dueling is a little more generic, but I still wanted an effect, of course, that referenced Pachycephalosaurids. This was originally in the game as just Arena with a screenshot from the Lego game, which is like the only time we've seen the interior of the arena, but I was never happy with that image, so we got this like kind of ultra high res, closely zoomed in shot of the Pachycephalosaurus arena from the movie. This is coming from like the scene where you're kind of seeing the vista of the whole like Main Street area. This is a chaos effect to add a hype token, and then you accumulate these tokens over time. Then if you roll the big chaos effect 5, suddenly those tokens essentially become money. So you're generating a bunch of money all at once based on the amount of hype that's been built up. Kind of a fun little effect. This is definitely a case of like, I had this original arena, which is like provide income if there's like a small animal, blah, blah, blah. Very dull. So, a card that I sat down and did a full rework on, and just thought about an effect to put on this that still referenced, the fact that it's like this arena and Pachycephalosaurids, and this is what I came up with. I think ultimately, this is a fairly underwhelming attraction if you're not using it with Pachycephalosaurids. It's very much like targeting Pachycephalosaurids. Switching the income per token from 1 to 2 is a huge boon, doubling the value. And it's more so that like the +1 income base is intended if you have to use this for some reason or another without a Pachycephalosaurid, right? You shouldn't use this in your deck if you're not running Pachycephalosaurids, but if you are running Pachycephalosaurids, you can, in this card, you could maybe consider putting it in a different paddock without a Pachycephalosaurid, just because. Dinosaur. Kind of the only thing resembling an attraction seen in Jurassic Park 3, because it is literally an attraction. It's a hang glider. So we added this to the game too for updates that were added later. Another chaos effect trigger. So different chaos effect levels, 1, 3, and 5, which provide different bonuses of income to the paddock. Kind of representing the idea that you're on a hang glider, you're at the mercy of the wind. And depending on how good, the wind is that day, you see more stuff and it provides more income. That's kind of the concept. Aviary is very similar to the treetop gazers in that it interacts specifically with pterosaurs versus sauropods for the gazers. It provides more of a bonus because it is also providing the security to your pterosaurs, making it harder for them to escape. Because they're contained in a dome, and that's how domes work. But still a very basic card. I still think it's perfectly reasonable thematically. It's got a lot of history behind it in terms of like the development of the game, and I've never felt terribly compelled to change it, so it stays. Auction House. This is another effect that was added when I was trying to expand the paddock upgrades and add things for some of the other movies. This was an opportunity to kind of come up with an idea for something from Fallen Kingdom that could resemble an attraction. So this specifically allows you to sell your dinosaur tokens. So you're essentially, running auctions in a paddock and, selling your baby parasaurs or whatever dinosaur might be in that paddock to visitors. So it takes 4 revenue typically to clone an additional population, but then on your turn, as your one action for the turn, you can remove that token to instead make 7. So it is a economic engine that requires some upfront investment in terms of time spent breeding population and consumes your action for the turn to make the money. So obviously it's awful in conjunction with like Innovation Center. But this isn't a headliner. So you would never run this with Innovation Center, but if you did want an action in your park that made some money, this would be an option. It's not the greatest card, but that's why it's 0 expense. It's just another tool you can use. And then we got our headliners. So we have 5 headliner attractions, kind of representing, major iconic attractions and things from the films. We'll start with the reinforced holding pen, which is the one of these 4, or the only one of these 5 that is not actually like thematically an attraction. This is the ultimate security upgrade, just straight up blocking the animal in this paddock from escaping. Now, you may say, but in the movie, they literally escaped from this paddock. They did, when it was disabled. And this can be disabled. So if somebody plays the sabotage on your park that disables this paddock, then the dinosaurs can escape. So it's perfectly in line with the depiction of it in the movie. The raptors never escape until the power is sabotaged. Well, not sabotaged, till the power is cut. Nedry specifically did not sabotage this pen. The reboot of the system inadvertently shut off power to it. So yeah, this is kind of the ultimate upgrade of the electrified fence and the reinforced heavy fence or whatever. For the actual attractions, we have the feeding show, one of the more iconic shots of Jurassic World. This functions on any paddock as a simple income upgrade, on par with the gyrosphere without the movement effect, which is a little overpriced. But specifically, if you have a Tyrannosaurus or a Mosasaurus, a big headliner animal in this paddock, you get a fairly substantial fame bonus, and you get protection from the card No-Show. No-Show being a very powerful obstacle that just makes an animal not count for a turn, essentially. No-Show says the animal can't be exhibited, which means it doesn't make money or provide any fame, and can be used as like a non-conditional way to delay a victory for a turn. Very powerful, and this just straight up negates it. I think I'm of the opinion this effect is a little too specific, and this could probably use with a slight rework. I like the idea overall. It might even be as simple as just, if there is a headliner in this paddock, it's +2 fame, something like that. But this is the final version as it stands in alpha, so this is the version that gets released. One comment I forgot on Auction House, this needs to be reworked for, or probably needs to be reworked for the beta 4.0 version. Because the effect is, as an action-based effect, becomes a little weird when it becomes more spammable. But, you know, maybe it could exist in almost exactly this form. Not a huge concern. Explorer Tour, referencing, of course, the Explorer Tour from Jurassic Park. Obviously had to be a card. And just iconic, so it becomes a headliner. If there's an herbivore and a carnivore in adjacent paddocks, this specific paddock gets a hefty +3 income and +1 fame. The idea being that you have this nice, diverse tour set up, and it's very exciting for the visitors, which is why it gets these bonuses. It's a little different than the clade-based adjacency upgrade, so it is a distinct effect. And since it provides fame bonuses are typically only found on headliners. Cretaceous Cruise is one of the very first paddock upgrade headliners designed. The original version of this provided just herbivores in this paddock and adjacent paddocks +1 income. Now it also affects Spinosaurids, because thematically the interaction with water makes a lot of sense. And Baryonyx and Suchomimus were on the cruise in Jurassic World, if you take the website to be canon, which it may or may not be, but probably should be mostly canon. It looks like it's a fairly simple effect initially, but this is deceptively powerful, because just 2 adjacent animals gives you 3 sources of bonus income, and you get that income every turn, because it's not like it's 3 income on one paddock, and then if that paddock gets disrupted, you don't get any of the money. It's 1 income on 3 paddocks, so it's much harder for the enemy player to disrupt the income coming from this this upgrade. It also interacts very favorably with Parasaurolophus, because you can have Parasaurolophus as the upgrade slot in the adjacent paddock to the Cretaceous Cruise, and then this is making you $4 a turn from a spread of herbivores and Spinosaurids for a mere 2 expense. Very efficient. I would say that Cretaceous Cruise and Parasaurolophus are like peanut butter and jelly. They go together, largely. There's other things that Parasaurolophus benefits from, but like, if you're running Parasaur in a deck, you're probably running Cretaceous Cruise. The final one added to the game, added after the initial 3.0 alpha playtest, was Amphitheater. Again, added when I was adding a lot more. Lost World, rebalancing deck construction, and looking to expand the card pool for more paddock upgrades. This originally was kind of designed as just the headliner fame reducer. So this is, the wording of this is very particular. Well, there's a species in this paddock, you need to exhibit 2+ fame to win. It does not provide 2 fame. It reduces the requirement to win by 2 fame, which means it does not matter what happens to the species in this paddock. As long as the amphitheater is occupied, it's easier to win, even if the animal escapes. And that was the original version. Almost immediately, that was way too generic and boring. So I've added this chaos effect here to gain additional revenue. If you roll the chaos effect, this is not, again, not too, keeping with the theme of the card, it's not +2 income to the animal. It is a flat, immediate gain 2 revenue. Again, to kind of make amphitheater very distinct from the way typical attractions work, and make it work irrespective of the effect of the animal and whether or not the animal is still in the paddock. Does that make that much sense for the amphitheater? This is definitely an effect that I would not object to changing or moving to a different card. I definitely wanted the San Diego Amphitheater in the game, but like, is this how it should be represented? Highly debatable. But again, we're not working on this version of the game anymore. I wanted to release what I had, and this is what I have. So it is a perfectly playable headliner card. It's just maybe not the most exciting or thematic of the headliners. So, yeah, that's all of the assets. We have one more video coming for card reviews, card reveals, both commentary, coming theoretically tomorrow, which will be the obstacles. And then at some point in the near future, I will try to put together at least a basic rules video as well to just show how the game is played comprehensively in one singular video, one singular place. And then we'll put all the cards up on the Discord server for download as well at that time. So let's leave this video here then, and we'll come back for the obstacles soon.